There were a whole series of measures that had been planned, prepared, that the Labour government would come in and would hit the ground running.
Now, what was their diagnosis, both publicly and, to be honest, largely privately, about what was wrong with the country? It was that the Tories were It was that the Tory party were feckless, useless, disputatious, riven with internal splits, and as a result, now the Tories have gone and things aren't improving, and the politics that they're in is so fractious, the Labour Party finds itself almost like it's run down in the road. They can't compute, haven't been able to compute exactly what to do next.
It's John.
It's Lewis.
And we are in Liverpool on the banks of the Mersey at the Labour Party conference, and if it's Monday lunchtime, the Chancellor of the Exchequer must have just spoken, and she has. And Rachel Reeves, we've seen the low point for Rachel Reeves when she was in tears in the House of Commons, and the economic outlook doesn't seem to be getting much better, but she was trying to paint a sort of optimistic picture about the future, whilst at the same time saying, God, there are some bloody difficult decisions ahead.
Look, this is a conference, this is a party which has come to Liverpool, I think desperate for some answers about where the party's been and where the party's going. Looking for definition, political definition from both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, and just a sense of diagnosis as to how it can be that this is a party which is only 15 months into government, and yet somehow, John, I don't know how you think, what you think about this, it almost feels when you're talking to people, when you're talking to MPs, when you're talking to ministers, to SPADs and so on, it almost feels as if they're in a sort of year 9 or year 10 of a government, and they've almost as if they've got an election which is sort of 6 months away on the horizon in the near future, that they feel like they're definitely going to lose, as opposed to still being a pretty freshly minted government with 3.5, 4 years of the mandate still to run. That is, to me, the sort of conundrum of this conference, and I think it's actually basically the question that so many people who have come, the delegates and the MPs also, are basically all running through their minds and are looking for a sense of answer to, solution to, from Rachel Reeves and from Keir Starmer. So Reeves' attempt to do that today. And look, I think there was some great stuff in this speech. I thought the attack section that we heard at the top there on reform was powerful. I think there were some great sort of Labour things in the speech. I can already see some sort of rather pointed sort of commentary online taking the piss out of making fun of the thing about school libraries and the fact that Rachel Reeves was saying there are 1,400 schools without a school library in the country. No, that's the sort of thing that not just tickles the Labour Party's belly, but is what the Labour Party is about. It's about spreading opportunity and helping poor kids with the next start in life. But in terms of the answer to that question I've just talked about, I actually think what Reeves said was pretty muddled.
Well, I think that the definition that you spoke about was the failure of Labour's preparation for government. What was the mission of this Labour government other than to replace the Conservatives after 14 years, blah, 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 blah. And she spoke an awful lot about the Tories because actually she still wants to be able to blame the Conservatives at the next budget for some of the fiscal decisions that she's going to have to take. And so it was very important to keep the Conservatives in the crosshairs, even though you've been in government for the last 15 months. I think two things have possibly helped Labour with the answer to the definition. Now, it's not a satisfactory answer in terms of what is our grand vision for Britain, but I think the Andy Burnham going hard, going early, setting out his thoughts so clearly has kind of focused minds, and I thought that, she takes aim at Andy Burnham, and you talk to any one of the people around Keir Starmer and they think that Andy Burnham has given them an opportunity and have given them a chance to define themselves. And I think the other thing, which again goes back to reform, is where Farage stood on indefinite leave to remain and saying, right, even if you've been in this country for years, even if your partner, your husband or wife is here legally, we're going to boot them out. I think that has given Labour at last something to define themselves against reform by. And I think that's important because I think that, frankly, we've spoken about it on the podcast. Where is the kind of standing up and saying this is not acceptable? And I thought that with Keir Starmer's interview yesterday about racism, we got some of that.
Well, I mean, I think there is a lot of nervousness about what Starmer said in terms of, from some, talking about racism and saying that Nigel Farage's policy was racist, partly because it cuts against all of the thrust of where Labour has been up to now, which is basically to actually essentially say we agree with Nigel Farage about quite a lot of the problems, but we basically think that he's incompetent or his numbers don't add up. We talked about it on the podcast on Monday when Farage announced that policy. What was the Rachel Reeves response? It was basically, well, it's the numbers don't work, which sort of implied that if the numbers did work, it would be a good idea. Fast forward to Saturday, and Keir Starmer is saying, this is a racist thing, it is a moral problem. You've already seen a shift from just kind of managerialism to values in the space of the week. Now, that might well be a good thing, and I think if it was sustained, it would be a good thing. But I think it does tell you something about how quickly Labour's strategy is shifting and sort of darting around, that would be the case. It also, you could say, it's a sort of difficult thing to thread to some extent, when at the same time you've got Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, who's speaking later on this afternoon, basically at the same time announcing Labour's own crackdown on indefinite leave to remain. All of that said, I think one thing is notable, and I think does vindicate exactly what we've been saying for a long time, which is about Labour needing to get on the front foot, be gutsier, be more values-based. Today is the first time I can remember for quite a long time that the news agenda is being dominated by something that Keir Starmer has said, or Labour has said, about Farage and reform, rather than the other way around. So even though it is high risk, it does tell you something about the value in this difficult news environment for Labour, about being gutsy, about being on the front foot, and to be honest, saying what they believe. Because that is, I'm sure if you actually drilled Starmer down to his core, and a lot of the cabinet ministers around, they would say that they would think that what Farage said on indefinite leave to remain is unfair, immoral, and racist. That's probably what they think, and sometimes in politics, when all else is in doubt, just say what you really think.
So I had breakfast this morning with a couple of people very senior in Downing Street, and one said, look, it was never part of the script that we would say that Nigel Farage is racist.
Well, we want Keir Starmer to be less scripted, that's what people say.
Exactly,
So,
exactly. But they said, and so they live with it. And so the upside is, exactly as you've just described, you get the definition that, you are against reform for that policy. The danger is, and it's seen in the Daily Mail today, that the Daily Mail portrays it as Starmer thinks you are a racist if you vote reform. And of course, that's not, what Keir Starmer meant or was saying. And I think you can make the argument that, people vote for reform for all sorts of reasons, but indefinite leave to remain argument of Farage, which will affect non-Europeans, because Europeans can stay in Britain, but non-Europeans could be subject to being thrown out of the country even though they came here legally.
And you know what's weird about this debate, John? And again, it's such a sort of weird SW1 thing now, or sort of the way our media works. It almost feels like in Britain we've got to the point where accusing someone of racism or being racist, in your view, is worse than actually being racist or having a racist view or suggesting a racist policy. That's the kind of weird witch hunt that we're in. I'm not saying for that. It's not for me to say whether this policy is racist or Farage is racist or whatever it happens to be. But that's the kind of weird, jaundiced place that we've got into. We spend the entire, we saw that even with the Tommy Robinson stuff, or we saw it with the sort of, Unite the Kingdom March and everything like that. Everything becomes a discussion, a kind of meta discussion about whether or not it's okay to call someone racist, rather than actually engaging with the reality and the truth as to whether someone is being racist or is a racist or has a history of racism or not, which is just bizarre.
Yeah, but I think that is a sign of how much our politics has changed, and how much, it seemed to me unthinkable that this is 3-4 years ago that this debate would be kind of taken so seriously, or, frankly, the threat of reform. But I think that, Labour have not had an argument against reform. They've had it. There's one other thing I want to raise, which is, the budget, which is the government's next huge test coming up. And the phrase that Starmer kept on using in his interview with Laura Kunsberg yesterday on the BBC, which is, the manifesto stands. Well, will you raise taxes? The manifesto stands. Well, why don't you just repeat the lines? And I'm not sure.
This is the question about whether they will increase VAT or national insurance or income tax.
Yeah, and I just don't understand where they are on this, because if that is the policy, that they're not going to raise VAT, income tax and national insurance, then just say so. And Rachel Reeves has sort of said that today. So what was Keir Starmer doing yesterday? And I'm surprised there hasn't been more attention focused on this, because it will be a huge decision if Labour say, right, we're going to break our manifesto and we're going to raise VAT.
Yeah, and they definitely need a very compelling story and account as to why that would be the case. And so far as we know, one thing about this government has been that they have not been compelling story makers. They kind of burn through stories, they burn through narratives. And I think you're right, there's this very peculiar language that has been adopted about saying that, and because Rachel Reeves has been repeatedly asked, and Starmer, particularly focus on VAT and whether VAT might go up, because VAT is a very easy way of increasing revenue. It happens kind of immediately, you can do it, it's almost impossible to avoid, etc. So it does could potentially raise a lot of revenue to help Rachel Reeves get out of the so-called black hole that she may be in as a result of the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, changes to growth forecasts and productivity forecasts, which we know are coming. But it is a very peculiar thing to say, well, basically, my promise stands. Which basically means my promise stands right up until the moment that I break it, which is just a kind of very political sort of weird, which is, as you say, it is getting more attention because it's a very particular form of word.
But I think they need to be making the political argument. I mean, look,
they need to do it now if they're going to do it.
Exactly.
And that's what I thought about Reeves' speech. So what I thought about Reeves' speech, I know you and I slightly disagree about because we were in the hall and we were talking about it after. What I think about Reeves' speech is there were some good bits in it, and actually she can be quite an effective platform orator. She's usually quite a terrible interviewee, but she's quite a good platform orator. But the complete, it summed up to me the muddle the party is in a lot of ways right now, because she burned through themes, she burned through ideas. I mean, I just noted some of them down. So, just in the same speech, basically, obviously she was slamming reform, she was talking about our patriotic missions, she was talking about having faith in what is to come, she was talking about our patriotic cause, the slogan was Renew Britain, unlocking opportunity, and then this particular bit, which I think really sums up the confusion. She said year one of our government was about fixing the foundations, and year two was about building something better. Now, the thing is, she, in the next breath, started talking about the fact she's going to have to take tough decisions when it comes to the budget come November. Well, hang on a minute. If year one was about fixing the foundations, then why are we still having to make tough decisions? If a builder comes along and says, I've fixed the foundations of your house, and then in year two, the house starts slipping again, you'll turn around and go, well, you didn't really fix the foundations, did you? So I think one of Reeves' problems right now is that she does not have a compelling account to the party or the country as to why it is that she is continuing to having to take these difficult decisions that she is having to make. And part of the reason for that, we can talk about some others, part of the reason for that is because she herself has imposed the fiscal conditions on which she now operates because of her commitments on tax, and partly as well because the growth that she promised has not been forthcoming.
But if you look at why the welfare reform measures failed, and that rebellion kind of absolutely scuppered the plans of Rachel Reeves, which adds to the sense of the fiscal black hole, was that no political argument was made. It was an accounting exercise that we need to raise X billion pounds because of having to spend more on defence, and therefore, personal independence payments will be in the firing line. And you think, there should have been weeks and weeks of preparation, of preparing the Parliamentary Labour Party, of preparing the unions and kind of key stakeholders and civil society that this is what you were going to do. And they didn't do it, and Labour MPs said, hang on, no, we're not having it. If you are going to break a manifesto commitment, and the consequences that go with that of such a headline manifesto commitment, then I think you need to be making that argument pretty clearly now and preparing everybody for it, and to say why and what the advantages will be at the end of it.
So I thought there were two things which stood out in a way. One is that she is, in a way, one of the most compelling bits, or the most notable bits, is, as you've already said, John, where she basically talks about the importance of fiscal responsibility and the idea that there is nothing Labour, there's nothing social democratic, there's nothing progressive about spending £1 in every 10 on debt interest payments, there's nothing Labour, or it doesn't promote social justice to lose control of spending and then end up basically the bond markets coming after you and so on, which, as you say, was partly aimed at Andy Burnham. It reminded me a little bit, remember this, in the late 1970s, when Jim Callaghan makes a speech when he becomes Prime Minister, where he basically says that the old model of Keynesianism, where you basically spend your way out of a recession, he tells Labour that option, insofar as it ever exists, no longer does, right? So, and people say, Thatcher was the one who sort of came up with that. Actually, it was Jim Callaghan in the late 1970s who kind of brought about the end of that old order. That's sort of fine. But I don't think the Labour Party is in any mood to hear it. I don't think the Labour Party, we saw this over the welfare bill. We saw it over the proposed welfare changes. We're seeing it over the two-child benefit cap. If it's the case, right, that Rachel Reeves is basically anchoring her entire reputation and her politics around saying, look, I would love to spend more, but we can't. The truth is that on all sorts of different areas, they have given in repeatedly, whether it's on welfare, whether it's on pension, whether it's on pensioner payments, and all of these different sort of things. And I don't think that the Parliamentary Labour Party or the country right now really wants to hear that message around fiscal discipline. And I think we're looking ahead to the contours of the autumn to come, the political autumn to come. I think that is basically the defining kind of fissure in our politics right now. It's the fact that Reeves, because she feels that she has to, and because the markets are telling her that she has to, is basically being forced into a series of spending decisions, and the Labour Party, most Labour MPs, aren't convinced about it and don't want to hear it.
So this is where I kind of agree with you and disagree with you. Where I disagree with you is I think that what she did was successful in the speech, or the argument that she made was, yeah, there are bloody tough times ahead, but look at the progress we're already making. I mean, for a Labour Party audience, which is, partly who she was talking to, and, addressing them, I thought that the values stuff and the morality stuff and what they're already doing to help people with school meals and, pay for nurses and all those things that are kind of the press button issues that kind of Labour activists love. I thought she was moderately successful in marshalling that argument, but also at the same time as saying, yeah, very tough decisions, and no, we're not going to be able to just loosen the purse strings massively in the coming period. Now, look, I think that governing right now in a social democratic country in Europe is bloody difficult. And I was with a former senior Treasury civil servant last week, who was there when the Tories were in power, and was saying it was just almost criminal, the legacy that she was left by the last Conservative government and the fiscal black hole. So, I mean, she has had a difficult hand to play.
They haven't landed that message.
No.
In a way that David Cameron and George Osborne very successfully in the post-2010 period basically landed, which lasted for years, landed with the public the idea, largely unfairly, but that the Labour government had spent too much, and therefore all of the things they were having to do, we don't want to do them, but it's a result of the inheritance that was left behind. I think there's loads of reasons why that hasn't landed this time. More hostile media environment, the fact the country, I think, is just sick of that kind of hair shirt message, and they were more willing to hear it in 2010 than they were in 2024, and the fact that perhaps Starmer and Reeves are less politically adroit and less good at communicating that stuff. But I think there's another, just thinking, John, I think when I think about this conference now and where the Labour Party currently is in its thinking, I think fundamentally one of the problems, or the biggest problem of all in which they find themselves, is that basically they were lazy, intellectually lazy, in their run-up to the general election. You've already referred to this, in the sense that what was their diagnosis, both publicly and, to be honest, largely privately, about what was wrong with the country? It was that the Tories were It was that the Tory party were feckless, useless, disputatious, riven with internal splits, and you may well think that all of those things were true, but they were not the root structure, but certainly not solely the root structural causes of British decline. And the truth is, although Keir Starmer, going into the election, was quite big on diagnosis in the sense of saying, right, Britain has got a massive sort of set of problems, they did not really, seriously, in any kind of intellectual project way, develop a sophisticated analysis beyond the Tories' own incompetence as to the problems that we've got in. And as a result, now the Tories have gone and things aren't improving, or they're not improving rapidly, the growth isn't coming rapidly, all of the things that they hoped would happen are not happening, and the politics that they're in is so fractious, the Labour Party finds itself almost like it's run down in the road. They can't compute, haven't been able to compute exactly what to do next, because they didn't do that thinking when they were in opposition.
Look, it's obvious that the marked difference, if you think of when Blair came into power in '97, kind of operational independence for setting of interest rates by the Bank of England, the minimum wage, there were a whole series of measures that had been planned, prepared, that the Labour government would come in and would hit the ground running. Now, some people might have not liked the policies that people came up with, but astonishingly popular, the headwinds. But Blair came in '97 with the economy really in a great shape after kind of the disaster.
Problems are terrible.
And so the legacy has been terrible. but there wasn't the thinking done about what they were going to do and how they were going to craft their message.
There's one other thing to prove that. I do think, and in a way it's not our fault directly, but it's the media's fault. I've been thinking about this a lot in the last few days, which is, and I think actually Labour would do quite well to actually come out and start sort of attacking it as part of a different sort of media strategy, which is that, don't you think that one of Labour's problems right now is that they find themselves, and it's partly because they seem to have so few ideas in the governing space and policy space that they talk about very kind of excitedly or in an interesting fashion. We talk so much about, it's almost as we started with the show with, it almost feels like there's going to be an election tomorrow or in 6 months. Whereas, of course, there's not going to be an election for 4 years. We in the media, I think we have started, the media more generally, and it's partly because there's now such a surfeit of polls, so many more polls than there used to be. Twitter is full of polls and everything. We've become almost American in our media political culture of basically talking about elections all the time, rather than actually governing projects, what the government is doing, the sort of policy issues, right? In America, it is true. It is true that there's always an election around the corner. Yeah. So that's what's determined that media political environment. But in Britain, it's not. We don't actually have, there's still 4 years. You think about where we were in the parliamentary cycle, in the equivalent in the last parliament. Boris Johnson had just won the Hartlepool by-election. He'd won a ton of loads of council seats. He was riding high. He was talking about basically destroying the Labour Party. 18 months later, 12 months later, he's gone. Truss happens. Starmer's coming in. So I do think that part of it, in terms of the malaise, is part of the kind of media culture that we're in. But also, Starmer, I think tomorrow, it's a delicate thing to say because you want to recognise the extent of the whole, and the Labour Party do fear reform, and I get that. But there's a little bit of like, lads, let's calm down a little bit here. Let's keep our heads a little bit here. Let's not get distracted. But it does come back to that same thing. That is an easier message to land when you can say, this is the end point, this is the mission, this is where we're going. So let's not get distracted. The reason that this conference is so distracted by the politics right now is because they're so unsure what the Labour Party politically wants to do. So they're getting distracted by the wider politics that is happening around them. They need to decide what they want to do, and then everything else will fall into place.
One of the people that Rachel Reeves singled out for praise in her speech was Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, who is, of course, going for the deputy leadership and very much the favoured choice of the leadership as it currently is. We'll be talking to her in just a moment.
Well, we're joined now live on our stand, newsagent stand, by the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, who has come straight from the conference hall, having just made her speech. Education Secretary, thanks so much for joining us. You had an announcement to make on something the Labour Party has long desired on maintenance grants. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. So I announced today that we'll be introducing new targeted maintenance grants for lower income students in courses that align with our missions and our industrial strategy. We'll set out more details at the budget, but for me this is an important signal about how we make sure young people get the support that they need. It's the part of the system that's been missing for a long time in terms of maintenance grants since they were last scrapped by the Conservatives, and I'm delighted to be bringing them back.
The context of this is that George Osborne abolished maintenance grants and the Conservative government introduced loans, which has meant that we've been in a slightly invidious position where quite often poorer students, because their parents are less able to support them through higher education, end up becoming more indebted than richer ones.
Yeah, so there are still loans, of course, and just last year we increased the loan, but previously there were loans and grants for lower income students. Those grants were taken away. And I've been determined for some time to bring them back because I am worried about the cost of living pressures that lower income students are facing, and I want every young person to be able to choose their path and be able to go on to a college or university course that's right
and
for them.
And how many students will that help? Because you say, is it only for specific courses and presumably an income threshold? What are the details on it?
So we'll set out all the detail at the budget, but it'll be paid for by the international students levy that we'll be introducing. So a fee that will be charged to international students, and we'll reinvest that into domestic students.
And just one final thing, would your ambition be to extend it to all courses at some point, if you're able?
So as I say, we will set it out at the budget, but this will be around courses that are aligned to our missions and also to industrial strategy. We want to make sure these are high quality courses where young people have got a great destination.
And how many students do you think it will help a year?
Rather a lot.
But how many specifically?
I can't put a number on it at the moment. You'll have to wait for all of the detail to be published in the budget, but this is a significant change.
Yeah, I just want to, you say it's a significant change, and I know you're not going to give us the precise detail. I just want to know if it's the kind of very, very poorest and it's just a very small handful of people who will be affected by it going into higher education, or whether it's sort of slightly wider than that and will affect, quite a large number of students.
So all of the numbers and the thresholds we'll set out in terms of the approach we take, but this is a significant change, being no doubt about it. The principle of the reform, which is maintenance grants brought back for the first time in many years, but I know that many students, young people, thinking about going onto university or to a college course will have the confidence to do so because of the actions that I'm taking.
And just one counter argument to it. I mean, a lot of universities, a lot of higher education institutions kind of see that their future depends on having high numbers of overseas students coming to their institutions, and that's the way they fund the university. If there's going to be an additional levy to pay for that, does that put off overseas students coming?
So international students make an amazing contribution, not just to our university sector, but also to our economy and to our wider communities. And I see that myself in Sunderland, where we've had big numbers of international students come and study and then return home, and you've built those amazing links between my city and other nations around the world. That's going to continue, and I've been clear that I want to support universities around that. But we did announce when we published the immigration white paper that we would be looking to introduce an international students levy. What I'm saying is that we're going to use some of that money that we're raising and invest in maintenance grants for less well-off domestic students. I think that is the right thing to do.
Is there, I mean, just thinking about this conference a little bit more widely, Education Secretary, there is, I mean, when you're sort of walking around, do you think it's a little bit flatter than it has been over the last couple of years? A little bit emptier, fewer people, less excitement? What do you think the mood is here?
I think, I've had lots, you'll appreciate, given that there's a lot going on in the Labour Party at the moment. I'm running to deputy leader.
Yeah.
I've had lots of conversations with lots and lots of Labour Party members. Look, I think, of course, we acknowledge that we haven't got everything right, but the clear message that I'm hearing from members is that they want us to unite behind what we've achieved, push on and do even more, give them even more things to be kind of proud of, out on the doors selling in terms of what this Labour government is delivering. And my pitch to those members is that we do need to unite. We've got to take the fight to reform and beat them, but that I'll have a seat at the cabinet table able to deliver for members. I'll be at that table when decisions are being made, not throwing stones from outside.
You've got a constituency where it would seem, if the polls are correct, the principal opposition to you will be reform. Do you feel comfortable going back to your constituency in Sunderland and defending what the Prime Minister said about the policy that Nigel Farage had on indefinite leave to remain is racist? And is there a concern that Nigel Farage will be able to say, which they've already tried to start to say, that means that Keir Starmer thinks that their supporters are racist?
No, because I think what the Prime Minister has set out, what I believe, is where the majority of the British people are, which is, yes, we do need to have rules that are enforced, and people want there to be a clear set of rules. But we can't be saying to people who've built their lives and made a contribution here that we're just going to change the rules and basically deport them. I mean, that is completely at odds with Labour values. It's completely at odds with the values of the British people. And I do spend a lot of time, speaking to the people that I represent, understanding what they're concerned about. Yes, they are concerned when they see crossings at the Channel. I mean, they worry about what that means for the people making that journey, but they are worried about border control. That is completely reasonable.
Is it potentially...
But what they also, the last public meeting I had on this was a topic of discussion. So 80 people in the room in a church hall in Silksworth in my constituency. People raised the issue of border control. What they also said was they wanted a fair system. When people overstepped the line and drifted into territory and language that was unacceptable, they called that out. That is where people are. A fair, humane system rooted in line with our values, where we've always been outward looking, always faced the world. But yes, you have to have rules you enforce. I think that's a pretty straightforward thing.
And would you say Nigel Farage is racist?
It's hard to escape the conclusion that because many of the things that he does and says, I think, drift into racism, it's hard to escape that conclusion.
And do you think that that is in danger of being portrayed as Labour thinks that anyone who votes reform is a racist?
No, because I understand the frustration that people have at the moment. They want to see change in their lives, in their communities, and they want it to go faster. But that conversation I had at the start of September with 80 of my constituents in a room, we talked about immigration, we also talked about NHS dentistry, we also talked about the cost of living, we also talked about local bus services. People want all of those areas to improve. They've had 14 years where services have been stripped away, where life has got harder and where people are poorer. And delivering on all of that will be critical to the next election. I look at the polls as anybody else would, but polls are a snapshot in time. They're not a prediction of the future, and it's within our gift to change it. If we unite, if we take the fight to reform, we can do it, and I am absolutely confident that if we make that case and we set out our story in a compelling way, we can win the next general election.
Do you think Andy Burnham has overplayed his hand?
Look, Andy can speak for himself, right?
I'm asking you.
Yeah, and I know. He's had plenty to say, hasn't he? He's had plenty to say.
Well, I'm asking you what you think. Do you think Andy Burnham has overplayed his hand?
I think all of us do well to remember that politics is a team sport. And we've got to be an effective team, working together, pulling together, uniting. Just chucking stones doesn't get you anywhere. And the members don't like it and the public don't like it.
What do you think about what he had to say about Number 10 creating a culture of fear in Westminster in politics and the PLP?
I mean, there's a certain irony when people say things like we can't talk about a subject and then talk about a subject, isn't there? I mean, there he is saying we can't talk about this, but here's my opinion and here's me talking about it.
You sound pretty angry with him, Education Secretary.
Look, we've got an opportunity here in Labour Party conference to set out our stall to the British people. We had an amazing speech today from our Chancellor demonstrating the difference that a Labour government is making, investment in our communities, real great jobs, making people better off. That's what we as a party need to be focusing on, looking outwards to the country. Well, look, we can't fight reform if we're fighting amongst ourselves, can we?
One Labour Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, once said of one of his critics that a period of silence from you would be most welcome. Would you think that would be sage advice for Andy Burnham to take?
Oh, Clement Attlee was a very, very wise man.
And Lewis Goodall getting Clement Attlee into an interview.
Could have mentioned Harold Lasky.
I know.
One other thing, Education. I noticed that obviously you're running for the deputy leadership. You're against that with Lucy Powell. There don't seem to be that many hustings scheduled between you. Would you like to see some more?
Absolutely, bring it on.
So if we were to do one on the newsagents, you'd be very happy if Lucy Powell would come along to come and do a hustings with us?
I'd be all for that. Love to join you.
Okay, and on the deputy leadership, are you kind of handicapped, given Keir Starmer's unpopular, to be seen as the representative of the leadership within the cabinet, and that, frankly, you look at Labour list and what they're saying and the polling numbers of CLPs and all the rest of it, you're not going to win?
I'm my own woman, first and foremost. I've secured really strong support from members right across our country, and I've also secured the support of many of our biggest trade unions, and I'm really pleased to have their support. And in the weeks to come, I'll be out there making the case across the country, in our workplaces, to our members, for why I'm the best person to take the deputy leadership forward. Because, look, I'll have a seat at the cabinet table. I'll be able to get things done, to make members' voices heard, to bring our movement and our members together and take that forward. If you're outside the cabinet, you don't have that reach, you don't have that clout.
So is your opponent for the deputy leadership one of those who's throwing stones?
Well, she won't be sat at the cabinet table if she's successful. I've worked with Lucy very closely until recently in cabinet, and I have immense respect for her, and we get on well. But the reality of the situation is, if I'm successful, I'll be able to push forward on Labour values, putting them into action in a way that Lucy would just not be able to do from outside of cabinet.
Bridget Phillipson, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
And we look forward to the hustings soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
look forward to it. Let's get a date.
All right, fabulous. Thanks.
Well, she had a lot to say, the Education Secretary.
She really did. You never know when it's all tittle-tattle, there's nothing to say here, move on, people are exaggerating it. And she really went after Andy Burnham, I thought, in no uncertain terms of what she thought about whether he'd overplayed his hand.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look, and I think it's no doubt that Bridget Phillipson, she denies that she's a number 10 candidate for the deputy leadership. I don't think anyone would seriously, credibly say that she would not be the favoured candidate if they could choose. But I think no doubt at all that she will be mirroring their view about Andy Burnham, which is, and as you say, John, people can say, it's tittle-tattle, whatever. There has never been any love lost between Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer, and that has never been truer this week. And actually, number 10, and you could see it and hear it in the way Phillipson was talking, I think quietly happy, actually, about the way that it has been playing out for Burnham, that, Burnham could have played it differently, and I suspect he's probably regretting that he didn't play it differently right now.
Yeah.
Not least because the Labour Party, unlike the Tory Party, actually fundamentally is quite even though it's deeply factional, it's deeply internecine, but it has this deep spirit within it, this deep strain of fraternity, right, and pulling together. It's one of the reasons they don't tend to get rid of their leaders, and they do not like the idea of a tall poppy coming along and saying what he thinks.
Well, it's like, look, he's trying to position himself as the king across the water, except he hasn't got a boat to get to the other side. And that's a bit of a fundamental problem. I was talking to someone who's kind of got a lot of experience in these things. He was saying, it's very difficult to mount a challenge. And it's like he has learnt the lesson sort of David Miliband, who hesitated about whether he was going to dare.
He ain't hesitating.
He ain't hesitating, but he's gone too far, too fast, and actually has kind of galvanised and given some definition.
And I think with regards to her in the deputy leadership contest, look, against Lucy Powell, she is the underdog. I mean, the polling is quite clear. And Powell has a much easier kind of narrative that she can peddle and spin and talk about, which is the idea of basically, even though she was in the cabinet until very recently, you know, she can say, look, I'm going to speak truth to power. This is basically a way of not quite sticking two fingers up, but certainly expressing your distaste for the current direction of things and going, Keir Starmer, we ain't too happy right now as Labour Party members, so this is the person who speaks for us. So it's an easier thing to do. But Phillipson, in a way, you know, if you are the underdog, you can speak with a certain level. You can take more risks. And it is clear that in the way that she's speaking and the number of events that she's doing, she's taking more risks.
Apparently there was a disco night the other night.
I know about that, John.
That Lucy Powell's music choice, when she was DJing...
Things can only get better, was it?
No, Lucy Powell was very Gen Z. And apparently...
Gen Z.
Gen Z, come on.
Gen Z. You're not in Washington now, John.
I'm sticking with Gen Z. And and Bridget Phillipson's playlist was very much for an older demographic. I'm just saying that.
What, Billie Holiday or something, was it?
I don't think quite that old.
Right, okay, a bit George Formby. All right, well, we've got Keir Starmer's speech tomorrow, the Prime Minister, and we will be here for you, bringing you all of the highlights then.
We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.